Welcome, welcome, team. I don't know what was going on this morning, but it wasn't letting me connect to my camera. So you're dealing with the webcam on my computer again. We don't know why. We have no idea why. It doesn't make any sense. I had to reboot it and start it over and all that crap. You know these dumb machines. But guess what? The sun is totally up, guys. And Bitcoin's running. So let's have a coffee and talk about what's new. Yeah, it made no sense. I don't understand. I use a iPhone to get the high quality video, and the iPhone is supposed to be detected as a camera on this. 99% of the time, I've never had a problem. Today, it refused to find it. I reset the computer, started the browser, everything. Won't find it. What do we do? We do have. Where did I put that fake news? Dang it. Things were a little wild and unorganized this morning because we just sent the kids to ballet. Well, anyways, we had some Moscow time, but we're going to have to skip it. I don't know where I put it. But I do have some good simulation talk. That's what I found today is some really good simulation talk. And what do I mean? Well, did you know all this stuff in Ukraine? Really, a lot of people talk about when it began because it was the 1 year anniversary yesterday. So when was it? A lot of people go back to the color revolutions and they point to the 2014 color revolution in particular. I go back one further. I remember the original 2004 revolution in Ukraine, which was called, do you remember? Does anyone remember what the 2004 Ukraine revolution was called? It was called the Orange Revolution. And it was the one where the leader was poisoned and he was the Western back guy and he was poisoned and then he got pockmarked from the poison and it looks like Putin poisoned him and it was the incumbent Russian aligned parties that were losing power. If you remember who they were, it was Viktor Yanukovych, the Russian connection, and then the color revolutions began, right? So that was the original color revolution, and it was an orange. So Viktor Yushchenko was a former soap opera turned politico, and when he got the movement behind him, and Western countries, Canada in particular, sent a huge delegation. I was actually asked to go into that delegation. I was part of it, but I refused to go at the time. It just didn't like a good idea, and it was heavily influenced by different democracy strengthening organizations. Right, that was the label that they used. So when that began, there was the first switch, right? And since then, we've seen a lot of this color revolution business go around the world. And Pedro L. Gonzalez on Twitter, using that NATO tweet that you saw yesterday, Ukraine on Fire was a wild documentary. Yeah, it sure was. It sure was. So Pedro Gonzalez did a really good tweet thread. I'm not going to read it all, but to what we were talking about yesterday with that NATO tweet about we are Harry Potter and William Wallace, the Na'vi and Han Solo. We're escaping from Shawshank and blowing up the Death Star. We are fighting the Harkonnens and challenging Thanos. That famous tweet continues to get a ton of reaction and comment. So Pedro Gonzalez says, hey, good morning, guys. Finally catching a live show. Yeah, sorry, a little late today, guys. It was a confusing setup for some reason. It shouldn't have been. So Pedro Gonzalez says, this god-awful NATO tweet intended to trick Westerners into supporting Ukraine is a good reminder that Ukraine is the birthplace of digital psyop. It's where the U.S. State Department intelligence agencies and the tech companies truly came together for the first digital coup. And he breaks it down to this National Endowment for Democracy and goes to the history of it, right? So he talks about who they are, where they came from. NED is an NGO that promotes civil society, and as we've heard many times, democracy fortification, right? And we're going to talk about how that has come to America, obviously. And around the world, among other things, sponsoring and providing training for journalists and activists directly or indirectly. So we mentioned yesterday, Hungary is going to get the benefit of this stuff now, right? That we were just told by the State Department in a really cool trailer, really high production quality, they're coming to strengthen and fortify democracy. And so Hungary, get ready. You're going to get some fortification your way. So he goes through what this group has done in its history and how it came out of the CIA. So here's a story from the 1960s. And it's about, well, there's one from the 1991 that he cites, right? So called Innocents Abroad, World of Spyless Coups. And what he says, the co-founder of the National Endowment for Democracy says, a lot of what we do today was done covertly 25 years ago by the CIA, he said in 1991. And the line where it comes from, right? So in 1967, Ramparts were humiliated by the CIA by exposing that it had turned the National State Association's international activities into an arm of the United States foreign policy through undercover financing and secret collaboration. And you saw that, as someone who went through all of those students abroad and all this kind of stuff, right? I went to school all over the place. And indeed, these people are engaged politically. That's usually how they end up getting picked for these, high-positioned foreign assignments in different schools. And you could see it, right? There was telltale signs. Sometimes they didn't even know, right? Sometimes the students that I met didn't even know what was really going on. They said, oh yeah, I met someone from the State Department and they just want to see how I'm doing. They just want to talk about what's going on at school and, and all that stuff. I said, well, I don't know if that's really what's happening. What it says is this was created out of that period, right? The Ed reduces the chances, he says, dramatically reduces the chances of the sort of scandal happening again because the openness becomes its protection, right? You create this front that is an NGO that overtly says what it's going to do, strengthen and fortify democracy, and whether or not that actually happens. The New York Times covered it back then. And he goes through, talking about Victoria Nuland, how she's been a part of these organizations and exactly what it is she does. He mentions that, she was key to the Clinton role in the original. So she served under Clinton from 1993 to 1996, played an influential role during the U.S. invasion and occupation of Iraq as a key advisor to Cheney. So she's on both sides and sort of consistent with what we've been talking about, how the Uniparty can mix people from both sides, especially on foreign policy, right? Especially on foreign policy. And he gives the formula for color revolution in this tweet thread. And he talks about building technological systems. But the real formula that he boils it down to is that more or less you push a contested election, right? You make sure the election is contested. And then once the results are a little confusing, right, and people are debating them and wondering and having trouble orienting themselves, you fund one side. And you put not only funding, you put all of this training into place, right? So he calls it hands-on training in a variety of areas ranging from fundraising, crowdsourcing, citizen journalism, PR tools for NGOs, Microsoft software programs for NGOs, and more. These are color revolution ingredients, is what he says. And indeed, they are the color revolution ingredients, right? You see it play out throughout the last 20 years. And the first revolution being now, it was a huge media campaign. If you remember the drama, if you were around back then, the drama that the Orange Revolution was contextualized with on TV, it was round-the-clock footage of people going for freedom and finally breaking through the yoke of Soviet control. But this was, of course, 15 years after the Soviet Union had already fallen. And he even calls them tech camps, right, where these tech camps would be supported by the State Department Civil Society 2.0 initiative is what it's called. And would really get these skills going and start cultivating this kind of debate and social disintegration, right? Social disintegration. And in the end, what you get when you have these breakdowns, no confidence in an electoral result, right? That becomes the main feature. And then it all becomes narrative, astroturfing, and psychological persuasion. And that's where this mythology becomes so important because, as we know, human beings have a narrative bias. We like to see things in stories. Even if they don't fit in a story, we'll prefer to see it in a story because it's easier for us cognitively to compartmentalize. So if we see a narrative, or if there is no narrative, we will in fact infuse a narrative on top of a series of unrelated events in order to understand them and contextualize them. Right? This is nothing you can do to avoid it. That's just the way we operate. We will take shortcuts using narrative bias in order to smooth over the edges of whatever facts happen. Right? So sometimes there would be no grand narrative. It's just random facts. If you put them in the right order, the human mind will fill in the blanks and complete the story. You've seen it. There's a famous video that I've noticed on Twitter that's been shared a few times of one of those whodunit videos or mystery thing. The detective comes in and there's three people there, and one was the killer. There's a dead body on the ground, and it's one shot all around the room with the camera. But the next shot, right, that scene is over, you get to see the set. So one camera back in scale shows the actual set and people filming the set, and then shows the amount of change that happened. Right, the body was changed, the murder weapons were changed, but you didn't see it in the one shot. Right, every time the camera moved, things would happen off screen. And there was something like 50 changes that go on, which you cannot perceive. There's no way you can perceive them. I've watched the video, you don't see any of it. Only after the fact can you see it, right? So when you see the end of the story and then you see how much manipulation went on, you understand just how much your brain. Oh. Is the stream still good? Saying there was a trouble. I think we're good. Tell me if we're good. Tell me if we're paused. Are we good? Are we good? Are we back? Let me know if we're good. Great. So the this whole situation, what he says here, Ukraine is truly. This is again Emeritus Pedro L. Gonzalez. Slight buffering. Okay, good. Yeah, great. Ukraine is truly the home of the war rest. A field psyop that looks democratic and strikes all the chords that resonate with pop cultural notions and tastes. Beneath the veneer is the engine of liberal internationalism led by the US. The consequence of the color revolution in Ukraine was that the current war became inevitable, and what that coup and the war have in common is that perception is shaped by the same digital tools that supposedly free us, but actually make us easier to manipulate. And he goes through some examples, and we don't need to see too, but let's just see how the simulation, I think, is not just winking here, but showing us in the same narrative bias way what we're headed for and what it looks like happen. And this is from both Kanakoa Substack and from Rasmussen Report. So if you know Rasmussen, it's a polling agency. Many people consider it to be more right wing, right? I think you can say it's less influenced by liberal politics. I don't know about right wing or left wing about Rasmussen. Basically, the only poll that I have any time for that doesn't seem gamed and in the bag for the narrative weavers. So this is what we see happen. Now, just look at this, right? This is from both Kanakoa Substack and Rasmussen, right? So Kanakoa Substack, Kanakoa the Great, commenting on the Rasmussen story. The political establishment and the left used the COVID-19 crisis to push for nationwide mail-in voting. This increased the number of ballots cast by mail from 28.8 million in 2016 to 66.4 million in 2020. It fundamentally changed the outcome of the 2020 election. But it's not just that, right? Here's what happened. Here's what Rasmussen says. Unsolicited U.S. election ballots, how did they know? Fauci and company funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan, China. COVID-19 broke out in late 2019. By January 2020, it was in the US. On January 31st, Trump ordered a China travel ban, initially opposed by Fauci. Throughout February 2020, cases of COVID were reported nationwide, with the first official deaths reported February 29th in Kirkland, Washington. The next day, on March 1st, 2020, something highly underreported happened. On March 1st, 2020, March 1st, 2020, the largest order in the world ever for ballot envelope stuffing machines was placed by a privately owned Arizona election printer. Arizona again. Thank you, simulation. Well, you keep bringing us to Arizona. We love it, right? Mass mailing of unsolicited election ballots was illegal in America at that time. Now, I've said it many times. I received another little pause. So I've said it many times. I received 5 ballots that summer at my home in Brooklyn. 5. There were not 5 people at my address. There were not 5 voters at my address. There were exactly 0 voters at my address. Americans lived there, but not old enough to vote. And I can't vote in the United States. So we got 5 ballots sent to us. Nowhere did anyone ask for ballots. I could have handed those ballots to my neighbor and said, do what you will with them, right? So could anyone. Every mailbox had those stuffed in. They were all over the place. So Rasmussen says, mass mailing of unsolicited election ballots was illegal in America at that time. But how did they know, right? So from there, you have all kinds of changes to the election system in every state to make this legal. And everyone who was paying attention in the summer of 2020 knew the American election was going to be contested. It was not going to have a clear winner. In fact, I was working at Kraken at the time, and I brought them the idea to create an election prediction market because I'm still thinking like Bitcoin media at the time, like how do I get in the news, right? How do I get a brand out there? You know, what made CoinDesk in the old days was that we invented the reference rate for Bitcoin, and that was it, right? We invented the BPI, the original indexed Bitcoin price, which was just an average over 4 trade venues. We chose them from Hong Kong to Tokyo and London and New York. It was Ryan Selkis, who myself and a few others who said, well, these are probably the only credible markets that we have with enough volume that it would sway the whole measurement. Jeez. What the fuck is happening this morning? So the goal that I had that summer when I knew the election was going to be contested, was going to be confusing. Now, remember, think about it, right? A lot of people see this coming. And now people who understand, we've discussed this a few times on the show, people who understand the trade-offs of a centralized system, engineering, credibility in a blockchain, right? So people who understand the architecture of Bitcoin understand there are trade-offs, right? That's why we have scaling debates, and that's why we get into all these fights. Still today, when you see debates about ordinals and block size and mempool and all that stuff, and the capacity of people to run their own nodes to keep participating, what you're actually looking at is people who understand the trade-offs of building one of these networks. You can make it convenient, easy, fast, right? Or you can make it credible. But you don't get to do both at the same time. You give a little in one area, you get a little in one area. And Bitcoin has the perfect mix, right? That's why we don't want to change it. That's why we're not risking any more surface area of attack. And that's why there's no rush to make it faster, stronger, better, right? It works just fine. and because it resists change and it's credible, right? We're interested in credibility, not ease of use. Visa is plenty easy, right? But it's not credible, like the back end of incredulous. So that's why we think it's important to change and optimize for credibility. Of course, we want our money to be credible, right? We don't want incredulous money. So, so we understand this stuff, right? We understand what happened in Arizona. People who are interested in Bitcoin, and that's why it's a little easier for us to understand this stuff. So I understood that in the summer of 2020, and I said, well, if we create an election prediction market, just like CoinDesk benefited from the BPI, and that's what helped CoinDesk's name in those days become highly amplified by mainstream media and all that, because someone had to reference the price of Bitcoin. Right now, CoinDesk lost that market. There's a million references now, all kinds of more sophisticated ways of looking at it. But at the time, it was a big benefit. And what I said to the Kraken folks is, in the days after the election, what you're going to find is there's going to be a lot of people searching for data points, and it's going to be easy to use the Kraken brand name in the conversation, because they're going to cite your prediction market. We didn't do it, right? But guess who did it? Right? It was SBF, right? SBF did it, and FTX became a household name in the week after the U.S. federal election, because everyone cited their market, and they all said the same thing. Oh, the impartial gamblers who are not political believe the market is going this way. So you had narrative cognitive closure, and people moved on, right? And when people moved on and let it go, I was sitting there going, but he's Biden's biggest blunder. How can anyone consider this to be impartial, right? He's clearly in the bag. And of course, everyone knew about FTX after. The market clearly was not credible, but it was treated as such. It was a very sophisticated psyop, if you choose to see it that way, which I do. Right now, I don't have proof at the time that it was a psyop, that this thing was being deliberately used in order to create cognitive closure around the election. But I don't need proof. You can see in the facts that the association between SBF, the Biden administration, automatically implies there's no credibility there. I don't need proof of corruption here. It's obvious, right? Truth and beauty. You don't have to look too far. What is there is enough, I think, to jump to conclusions. So, so what happens from that point on is we have this situation where the color revolution of Ukraine, the color revolutions that existed afterwards, have come to America. The literal battle plan that was used to divide up other countries was used on America. So what Kaneko and Rasmussen are saying here, if I'm understanding it correctly, is that it was known that Trump could not be beaten in the summer of 2020, or at least there was no confidence in it. So there was strategic maneuvers to create an incredulous election on one side of psyops. That's what January 6th is. We're seeing all this footage now come out from what Tucker Carlson has, and of course people are saying, oh, now they'll know where the escape rooms are, and it's national security, right? But how many have we already seen where there's already one video that's going around where you see the police from DC thinking it's a setup, right? They themselves are saying this is a setup. They're setting up 46, right? As in the 40 or the 45. They're setting up 45, right? Which is the number, the president number that Trump was. So right away, you understand that the original Orange Revolution, a psyop operation, has moved around the world, and the roosters come home eventually, right? And what we find is we did it to ourselves. We've done the division, the chopping up of people's brains, the inflammation of anger, and the astroturfing of myth and self-righteousness on top of the American people. And this is one of the largest scale psyops in the history of the world, it looks like. I mean, unbelievable in its scale and ambition. But But there's an interesting part of it, right? So it's not, in the end, I think that I think in the end there is some good news, right? Which is they've started the psyop here, but the narrative capacity is probably not as strong as is needed. And the reason is Bitcoin, right? Now, remember what the ingredients of the Orange Revolution are, right? He has hands-on trading in a variety of areas ranging from fundraising, crowdsourcing, citizen journalism, PR tools for NGOs, but the NGO part is their version, right? Microsoft software and programs for NGOs. Now look at what we have as Bitcoiners, right? Now look at what we have, right? Hands-on training in a variety of areas. Fundraising, very easy. We're really good at it, right? Really good. We have an idea in Bitcoin, we're going to get money for it, and we're going to push it through, right? Crowdsourcing, I mean, that's what we are. We are a P2P network, and our capacity to share ideas for mimetic viral information transfer between our community is unrivaled. They cannot come close to us. Are we sitting there referencing Thanos? No, we don't need to, right? We've got much more sophisticated means of communication than they do at this point. And citizen journalism, well, I mean, we're a lot better than they are. And what we see with these all access people, they were exposed around the SBF story, right? The people who got all of these exclusives and they're fake independent journalists, it's very easy to see the difference, right? Our capacity as Bitcoiners to separate authenticity from psyops is probably unrivaled in the world, right? And we're all helping each other too, right? So the ability for us to help each other navigate this stuff and the ability of the entire community to force things out and to welcome the things that will help us is really strong. Now, great internal debates about stuff, but what you'll notice in the Bitcoin debates is that it doesn't revert to hallucinating. It doesn't revert to psyop manipulation, right? We disagree about some technical things, the ordinal thing maybe, and all that, but none of this rises to that level. We're actually able to have debates. The way debates are meant to be had. Facts, counterpoints, perhaps a logical conclusion. Maybe not. We don't even have to come up with conclusions. We're able to move forward in ways where we might disagree about 1 or 2% of things. But in general, Bitcoiners, no matter how much they disagree, agree about 99% of their worldview at this point. Right? And because their worldview is quite simple, right? Their worldview mostly comes from the certainty that the financial engineers that are the symptom of the fiat system, which is to create an incentive for the best and brightest to go into financial engineering and not other things like building chairs and raising cattle and being farmers, those kinds of things. So we're here to stop that. And we're here for the best and brightest to alter their time preference at a very subconscious level, to take away the debt-based monetary system that more financial engineering and replace it with one that has a better time preference and a capacity for mastery and high quality and persistence and endurance and proof of work. And we're seeing it now in all the things we're building. I mean, if you go on Noster and if you go in Ordinals and you're a creator and someone like myself who has a book coming out, right? There's a whole field now out there for us to be successful and to be rewarded for our proof of work. And we're going to continue to lay down this new foundation and have these capacities as we go forward. So in the end, there was an Orange Revolution in 2004, 2005 in Ukraine. Everything that's going on right now will end another Orange Revolution, right? But the color revolution ingredients that the psyop manipulators are going to be co-opted by a much more effective and organic force. And we're going to be forced into that reality very shortly, right? So here's how we know we're going to be forced into that confrontation of psyop systems, right? it comes from this. I don't know if you guys noticed the Chinese peace plan. We released our Bitcoin peace plan yesterday, the ABC plan, right? The America China peace plan. Well, Xi copied us and also released the Chinese peace plan yesterday. And the Chinese peace plan, good points. It's not. It's kind of more written by bureaucrats. They made good points, right? America shouldn't do this. Respecting sovereignty of all countries, obviously, abandoning the Cold War mentality. China should listen to a lot of this stuff itself. But I think there's no way to deny that the Chinese proposal are pretty easy, right? Easy for China to adhere to, a little harder for us, I'd say, to adhere to. But those look like a credible peace plan, right? So on the All In podcast, they were talking about it, analyzing what's going on, and made some predictions, right? So David Sachs talks about Victoria Nuland, exactly who we were just mentioning as one of these propagators globally of the color revolutions, and said Nuland is the Fauci of this situation. The same way that Fauci was supposed to be protecting us from viruses, and then he funded gain of function research, Victoria Nuland was supposed to be our chief diplomat with respect to Russia and Eastern Europe. And what did she do instead? She ginned up this conflict by backing an insurrection in Ukraine in 2014. They brought in the Ukrainian far-right nationalists as the muscle. She was the State Department official who was responsible for backing this insurrection of a democratically elected leader in 2014. Ever since then, the relationship with the Russians over Ukraine has been heading south. If you are wondering why Putin seized Crimea, it was in direct retaliation for the coup that we backed in 2014. This is the origin of the conflict. I'm going back to 2004, though, so I'm going one further because Victoria Nuland wasn't there, but it doesn't matter. This is the origin of the conflict, and the fact that Trump is willing to talk about it is pretty incredible. Then they talk about how before the war, Biden refused to take NATO expansion off the table. He refuses to recognize the Russian interest in Crimea, and we gave no support to the Minsk agreement, which would have given some limited autonomy to the Russian speakers of the Donbass area. If we had done just those three things, there would have been no war. It's a lose-lose situation now. Biden has invested his whole presidency in this, and he can't just let them lose, which means more escalation from us and on the Russian side. If they lose, then they will have the incentive to use nuclear weapons, so it's really, really bad. And if you put it all together, right, then how can we, put it all together and then use it to predict, right? Put what they're saying together on the All In podcast and use it to predict. Is their prediction correct? Can Biden actually go for peace? Well, if you listen to anyone like War Clandestine, no way, right? Because it will expose what they're actually doing. They're not suing for peace. If you look at the Fauci-Nuland connection that was just mentioned by David Sachs, it looks like the color revolution was engineered alongside the virus, which is incredible to say out loud, right? It's incredible to say that and just let it be in the air that America found a way to create circumstances where our elections were incredulous, and then you fund the psyops in the fog of war of a contested election. This is the blueprint. They did it all over the world, and now it's here. So the good news is the Orange Revolution that started the color revolutions that have spread throughout the world for 20 years now will end with the ultimate orange color revolution. We're going to win this. And we're going to win because China is not going to bring any credible plans to the table. America is not going to bring any credible plans to the table. And in the end, people will abandon both of these institutions. They'll abandon both of the things that propel them forward. I predict you're going to see massive scofflaw of taxation, massive scofflaw in America of almost all federal oversight, authority, and jurisdiction. More and more states are going to go rogue. You're not going to get a national divorce, but you're going to get a new arrangement between the federal government and the states, right? The federal government, as we know it, as we've said many times on the show, was really just a relic of World War II. We invented it for World War II. It was the battleship World War II that we never shut off. We never shut off the World War II war machine. It stayed on. It's been on since then. And we've never even thought to turn it off. And that's where we get the myth that freedom comes from democracy. It doesn't. No American would have thought that 100 years ago. Freedom comes from the way you live, right? You live free. And more Bitcoiners are going to show more and more people around the world what that means. And we're going to win the orange revolution, the real color revolution, with the same tools, expressed in different ways and used by us in completely different ways than they were by these World War II relics. So that's what we got for today. It's going to be a little shorter. I'm going to have to bring my family in a moment. They're getting back from ballet. But I thank you for all your patience this morning. Slowly then fast in the end, like everything else. Yeah, it's going to happen quick, guys. It's going to happen quick. I mean, even imagine the next election. I think you're going to finally see it goes, but you're not going to see a replay of what happened in 2020 and at the midterms. You're going to see something bend one way or the other. And by bend one way or the other, either you're going to have the real direction, or you're going to have just incredulity more than we had over 2020. People saying this doesn't make any sense, right? And that's all we need. That's all we need. That's all we need. That's all we need. All right, team. Thanks for coming this morning. I appreciate it. See you tomorrow.